Welcome to the webinar. We are really glad that you could join us today, and we have a great lineup of speakers and content. This webinar is intended to show how communities around the country are using new technologies that have only become available commercially in the last 2 years to cost-effectively help address combined sewer overflows and reduce urban flooding. Most importantly, this webinar offers the opportunity to deploy these technologies in your community. I'm Marcus Quigley, Chief Executive Officer of OptiRTC, or Opti for short. Feel free to reach out to me directly or to Opti through the address and website that will be shown on the last slide of the presentation. If you have not heard about Opti before, or have only a little bit up to this point, you are in for a fun ride for the next 45 minutes. If you have seen or heard what we were up to but have not heard the latest, this should also be a lot of fun. Our pace of progress is pretty exhilarating, and the industry is changing quickly in fundamental ways. Opti was strongly supported by NOAA, EPA, and WRF during its early development. Over the last 9 years, those early research investments were nourished within a consulting context at Geosyntec and with numerous stormwater and wastewater partners. Opti was fully commercialized and capitalized as an independent company in 2004. The Opti technology has now been deployed around the country in 19 states. There are more than 130 active sites, some of which you will hear about today. Every combined sewer community, every community with stormwater discharges, has significant obligations under the Clean Water Act to minimize the impacts of discharges on receiving waters. Collectively, those of you on the phone and your peers will spend more than $100 billion over the next 20 years addressing these regulations. Any opportunity to dramatically reduce the cost of compliance and improve outcomes, particularly innovative strategies, is of keen interest. It's likely why you're here today. Opti offers such an innovative strategy. Opti is a unique technology that continuously monitors and adaptively controls infrastructure in real time by incorporating sensor data and weather forecasts into the operation of facilities. By actively managing the rate and timing of stormwater flows around rain events, Opti takes control of the hydrograph. Essentially, Opti redesigns facilities to dramatically improve their performance based on what is going to happen with the weather over the next 12 to 72 hours. The result is that Opti improves the effectiveness of new or existing infrastructure and helps keep our natural water bodies clean. All of you have existing storage assets, the most important of which are often upstream and on-site. CSO managers and directors are encouraged to hear that these upstream storage facilities can now be optimized without the need for new construction or major retrofit. Often these assets are scattered widely in the community. We show a few examples here. They look like aesthetic recreational water features in parks, traditional office park or development ponds, or on-site underground detention structures that were built purely for peat control. These detention structures in combined sewer areas are typically constructed during new and redevelopment. Many site connection or allowable discharge regulations have required these controls for more than 50 years, for example, in New York City. Even where these regulations do not yet exist, we are able to find significant upstream storage opportunities. We also wanted to note that these assets can be found on both public and private property. Opti works with our clients to support the site identification and selection process. Rather than us talk about how clients use Opti, we have invited a few clients and prospects, peers of the people that are listening to this webinar, to describe in their own words what they do and how they see Opti as a potential valuable solution and partner. First, we have Robert Gu, who is with the Environmental Protection Agency, and he's an environmental protection specialist in the Office of Water. Secondly, we're pleased to have Bill Simcoe, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the City of Albany Department of Water, Mike Miller with CHA in Albany, and he is a Vice President with the company. And then lastly, Fred Pocci, who is the Authority Engineer for the North Hudson Sewerage Authority in Hoboken, New Jersey. These speakers will talk about the specific challenges they have and will give examples of how Opti is being implemented or how they're thinking about using Opti in their communities. So first, we will have Robert Gu speak about his experience and the EPA's experience at EPA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Robert?
The system had to be inexpensive, tie into the existing cistern array, and be designed to discharge the rainwater either to the irrigation system or to the combined system in advance of a storm, so this full storm capture volume was available if a storm was predicted. Retrofitting the system was slightly problematic because we had to work with EPA and GSA facilities managers and with a historic building. At this point, the system is fully operational, and we can use the desktop application to monitor its performance and also change parameters to optimize storm capture based on forecasting data. We have altered the parameters once and have left the settings as they are because we have good capture at this point. The system is also designed so it can be switched from automatic to manual if there's some work needs to be done on the system. One of the benefits of using the Opti system is that the Opti folks monitor the performance of the system independently and notify the user if there's a change in system behavior. This has happened several times, and the problems were rectified as a result of being informed by Opti. At one point, the system filter was just clogged, and we could not discharge into the combined sewer drains. Another time, a relay failed, and the system was static for quite a long time before we recognized there was a problem. We have been very pleased with this technology and think it has widespread applications for stormwater and CSO management. The system has captured 60% of the rainfall, and at this point, it captured over 140,000 gallons of volume that would have otherwise been discharged to this combined sewer overflow. We also can effectively use the volume captured in the tanks for irrigation when there is demand. The last slide that I want to talk about demonstrates the system logic that is used to predict and manage the storm volume in the cisterns. So what you see here is that there was a storm predicted. The system logic decided what volume was needed in the cisterns to capture the impending storm. That volume was discharged before the storm, and after the storm occurred, the volume returned to the optimal volume that was needed for water supply purposes. So in conclusion, I think that this is a technology that has widespread applications. It should be considered for both inline, offline storage for managing combined sewer overflows or stormwater purposes. Thank you.
Great. That was excellent, Robert. And I always love hearing about your experience with this. I know you guys EPA supported the research early on at a national level, and it's just really nice to have an application actually in EPA headquarters. There's no better example than that for sure. So thanks for all the support, and thanks for giving us an overview. Next, I wanted to introduce Bill Simcoe and Mike Miller, who are both going to talk about their ongoing project in the city of Albany.
Bill, were you going to start us off?
Are you there, Bill?
Why don't I go ahead and get started? If Bill jumps on, I'll turn over controls to Bill. Essentially, the project that we're working on in Albany, it's a really interesting project, and we've been very appreciative of all the help and support that we've gotten from Opti. we really wanted to look at the system from a more holistic standpoint in terms of developing a wet weather flow management solution or program for the city. The city's been at this for a long time. Most of the work that we're doing really, and the projects we're going to highlight today are within the Beaver Creek Sewer Shed. Beaver Creek Sewer Shed is a little over 3,200 acres of highly urban areas with CSOs discharging to the Hudson River. So it's a very high-profile community, and as it represents the capital of New York State, and this is by far the largest combined sewer overflow in the capital district. So when we looked at some of the problems that have been occurring, this has been a long-standing issue within the sewer shed. Elberon Place is one of the projects we're going to talk about. Western and Quail is also part of the project. But these are rather severe flooding. There is rather severe flooding that has occurred in the city. And essentially, it's like I said, it's a combined sewer. And what happens is, as some of these low-lying areas, not only do we see surcharging from the combined sewers, but this is where nature kind of takes its course. These are all low-lying, historical low-lying areas in the city. So when the combined sewers are overwhelmed and water's flowing through the city system or through the city streets, this is where it ultimately comes to rest. So we've really tried to take a look at some of the worst areas in the city and tried to develop some solutions within these areas to start. You can go ahead and advance. So like I said, the Beaver Creek Sewer Shed is about 3,200 acres. The problems that we're trying to address as part of this program, one includes reduction of CSOs to receiving waters. The city is operating under an order of consent where they have developed a CSO long-term control plan, and some of these projects are strategies that are implemented under that program. But again, we're also talking about long-standing system surcharging and flooding issues that have a more localized effect and impact to residents as well. So the first project I wanted to talk about was, it's part of the Beaver Creek Sewer Shed. It's the Washington Park Lake project, and it really has two phases. Phase one of the project was the Quail Street project. This is a project that is nearing completion of construction as we speak. We have just done final inspections and are working with the contractor in order to button up that project. Essentially what we did along Quail Street was installed linear infiltration systems along the street over 8 city blocks. So it's a little under half a mile. And Opti is helping us with the monitoring of these systems. You've got equipment in the systems that are going to monitor soil moisture conditions as well as the operating levels within these infiltration cells for various storm events. One of the requirements for grant money that we received on the project was partially funded with $1.8 million of Green Innovation Grant funds from the Environmental Facilities Corp. So one of the things that we'll be looking to work with Opti on is, with this monitoring equipment, we're going to get a much better understanding of how the system is really responding to these various rainfall events. And it's really going to help us with more of a targeted maintenance program for these green infrastructure structures, or for the systems. Rather than just replacing soil medium every 2 or 3 years, we're going to be evaluating the performance of the system and then basing those maintenance decisions on the performance rather than just arbitrary timeline dates on a schedule. The next phase of that project is referred to as the Elberon. If you don't mind stepping back. Sorry about that. The next phase is actually a very important phase in the project, and it involves the management of flows using an existing lake within the park. It's Washington Park Lake, as you can imagine by the title up above. And essentially what that's allowing us to do is connect the green infrastructure systems, which are promoting infiltration. They've been designed to hold back 3 inches of rainfall. So one of the things the city has really experienced is these flash flooding events where they're seeing tremendous rainfall within an hour. In a couple cases within the past years, it was close to 3 inches within an hour. So the Quail Street project has been designed to accept that flow. But if we get higher flows, what's going to happen is the flow gets conveyed down the street to the downstream limits of the project, and then we'll be installing a new dedicated storm sewer, which will help establish floodplain storage in Washington Park Lake. So within the lake, we actually have availability to store 4 to 6 million gallons, and that's using an existing surface feature. So if you can imagine, we're really optimizing an existing feature that really already exists out there. If we were trying to create that same $4 to $6 million or million gallons of storage using gray infrastructure, project costs would have been substantially higher. And Opti is really allowing us to do this in the most effective manner. When we look at the management of the lake, we're really, and this is where it got interesting, we are really drawn to the Opti technology. It's really helping us with pre-event planning, and by that, what I mean is that if we see a significant rainfall event coming in, we have the ability to draw that lake down, within the operating range that we desire. So we've got 4 million gallons of storage from the normal lake level to the top limits that we want to operate the lake in. But if we do need additional storage, because we have seen some hurricane events roll through, we do have the ability to do pre-event drawdowns on the lake too. So that's a way that Opti is helping us really optimize that storage feature, as well as the actual management of flows during the wet weather event, and then also during the management of flows for post-event. For normal operations within the system, what we're looking to achieve is obviously to optimize the available storage. So for most rain events, probably greater than 90% of all rain events, we'll be able to operate the lake as a closed system, meaning we'll be able to store all the runoff within the lake during that event, and then do a slow drawdown after the event. In the case of our system, downstream limits of the lake does actually tie back to the combined sewer system, so it is important for us to manage these flows as they move through the lake. You can step down. So the next project I wanted to talk about real quick, and this is also within the Beaver Creek Sewer Shed, is Hanson and Reichman. Again, this was creating more storage within the system. In this case, we were looking to employ new GI infrastructure in the form of constructed wetlands, where we're generating approximately 500,000 gallons of storage, and then also a large stormwater storage infiltration gallery where we're going to achieve another 750,000 gallons of storage. Again, we're using the Opti controls to help manage these facilities. In both cases, much like the lake, we want to optimize storage during the events, keep as much of the flows in these facilities, and then discharge after the events. In the case of the infiltration gallery, we've also designed provisions so that we can potentially use the facility as a stormwater harvesting facility. And what the city is evaluating is the feasibility to either use it for irrigation of the ball fields that are within the park, or they're actually talking about storing that water and filling their cleaning trucks so that they can reuse the water that way. So to date, this project is currently out to bid. So this project is moving forward. Expects construction to start up in the tail end of August and probably come online towards the end of the year. With the Washington Park Lake, that will also be going out to bid this fall, and we look forward to putting that online probably early next year. And with that, I'll turn it back. Thank you.
Yeah, Bill Simcoe jumping in here. Thank you, Mike, for doing that part of the presentation. The city of Albany is very happy to be doing these projects. We did have an awful time in 2014 with flash flooding in the combined sewer system, and so these two projects are part of the response. and we know we need to do more of these types of projects. And we also see this as part of a push that we have to have a SCADA system and real-time information about our sewer system to be able to respond and to have that proper emergency response to flooding events. So we're really looking forward to implementing this and learning how this real-time control is going to work.
This is really excellent. I appreciate Mike and Bill coming and talking with us a little bit about the exciting things going on in Albany. We're really glad to be working with you guys on these projects, and it's very forward thinking, and the impacts and benefits to the community are really going to be significant. We're just glad to be a part of that as well. So the next speaker is Fred Pocci, and he is with the North Hudson Sewerage Authority, and he's the authority engineer. Fred, we'd love to hear about your experience so far in North Hudson.
Sure. Just to give you a little background, good afternoon, everyone. North Hudson Sewerage Authority services 4 communities which take up a 2-mile stretch on the west side of the Hudson River facing New York City. Our population served is about 180 to 200,000 people. We have 2 sewage treatment plants that discharge into the Hudson River, and we have just received new permits from the state of New Jersey that will greatly alter how we do business in the sense that we must reduce our combined sewer overflows to 4 events per year. And to give you an idea of the effect that it'll have on us, we're estimating, very preliminary numbers, we're estimating that we'll have to store 20 million gallons of flow during each rain event for the city of Hoboken alone. And as I like to point out to people, 1 million gallons is a 50 by 50 by 50 cube. So that's a lot of storage capacity that we don't have space for. In addition to which, city of Hoboken is in 75% of the city of Hoboken is in the 100-year floodplain, and they are in the process of designing and implementing the installation of a barrier protection to avoid the effects of Superstorm Sandy 100-year flood surges that occurred in 2012, which greatly affected the community. Opti came to our attention probably about 6 months ago, and in discussions with them, we are looking at possibly including a requirement for new connections. And we do have a lot of new connections because, for example, Hoboken was an industrial city that's being rebuilt as a residential city. So we have a lot of new buildings and new connections that are coming into play. And we're hoping that using this new technology, we can greatly reduce for each connection, we can greatly reduce the amount of flow that we have to deal with coming into the combined system. And the way that really happens, if we go to the next slide, is that for our typical 2-year storm, what happens in all of these storage systems is you can't go any smaller than a 2.5 inch outlet orifice for any of these tanks. So in essence, we don't really contain much of the common 2-year storm, which is the bulk of our problem. So we're looking at Opti technology to be able to maximize storage for these small storms and control the flows out into the system on a regular basis for all the storms. We are currently working with Opti on a pilot program. City of Hoboken is very proactive because of all the flooding problems with green infrastructure projects. And they're doing for the City of Hoboken, a large park in the southwest corner of Hoboken, which is the worst flooding area. Their rain gardens and bioswales will be able to total storage capacity of about 75,000 gallons, and we are negotiating. They bid out the contract. It's been awarded. We're going to negotiate with the contractor to install a Opti technology in the system so that we can maximize the flow and see the effects and the advantages of the Opti system for us going forward, because we're considering, I may have said this already, but we're considering requiring this technology for all new connections throughout the system, and this is a first step for us to determine how effective this may be. That's about it. So thank you, and turn it back.
That's great. That's great, Fred, and it's a really good overview, and we're looking forward to working with you. I was going to give a little bit of a quantitative background too about the continuous simulation modeling that we did for North Hudson, specifically to look at tank sizing and the benefits over existing passive systems. So we did modeling, continuous simulation modeling of both passive and CMAC alternatives for on-site detention. So Hoboken is proactive, as Fred said, about getting storage in place for new construction and redevelopment. So we looked at the existing kind of passive system requirements as conventionally designed detention, which have a low-level orifice outlet, and compared them to an actively controlled system. So for the Opti approach, or the CMAC approach, Opti functions to release water at the lowest flow rate possible to avoid an overflow of storage volume. So regardless of what's happening with the weather, it's always seeking that goal. Therefore, discharge can be completely eliminated for the smaller storm events, anything that's smaller than the tank's total volume. The CMAC tank completely eliminates discharges for events up to 0.9 inches in the model that we did. So you can imagine, because you can control this valve automatically, looking with a forecast integration, you don't have to discharge at all during events that are smaller than the storage volume. So this means that during 80% of all the rain events in North Hudson Sewage Authority area, we would, for these tanks that would have CMAC on them, we would have no discharge. For larger events, the facilities would discharge below the allowable discharge rate by modulating the outlet in real time. So it should be noted, as we saw in these other previous examples, that the real benefit, in addition to just decreasing the size of the facility, is that the total wet weather discharge volume prevented is very, very high. We typically see above 90% reduction in wet weather flow from Opti systems that are deployed in combined sewer areas. So a really dramatic improvement over just peak control. When CMAC is used to control the outflow, the detention storage tank design is also not limited at that point by the relationship between the driving head and the orifice flow rate to get the peak discharge target. So essentially the outlet is modulated in order to get effective peak control while also absolutely minimizing the wet weather flow. So essentially Opti redesigns and adaptively controls the system to maximize its performance for what's going to happen with the weather, the anticipated precipitation, and that really dramatically improves the value of the storage investment and allows it to be fully used for every event. So let's move to the next slide here. So we've seen performance in installations around the country for the last 7 years, and we've heard a bit about the ongoing and upcoming CSO mitigation projects and the impact that the technology can have on wet weather flows. And while this is kind of a great start, we know that our technology will have the greatest impact when it's deployed at the watershed scale. Our goal is to partner with CSO communities around the country, that's why we're having this webinar, to provide significant reduction of wet weather flows, and particularly using existing assets. The next slide here. To encourage adoption of this innovative technology, we're offering Opti's CMAC services for $200 a month through December 2017. So why that price? This approximates the price of services at scale meaning that when Opti is deployed at more than 20 sites within a community, this is really the cost for these types of services. They include 24/7, always-on continuous monitoring and direct control. We saw a question come in that was asking about whether or not the facilities need to be watched and monitored. The key thing for Opti is that it responds automatically without human intervention to what's going to happen with the weather. So the $200 a month covers services that automatically control the infrastructure to get the benefits that you've seen. And that's why the performance is so good. So those services also include encrypted secure data. So the information has to be collected and transmitted. Reporting and web dashboards, so all of the information that's collected, as well as any alerts or remote control is accessible through web dashboards. So this is available kind of everywhere that you have access to the internet. There are email-based alerts as well. The services are always up to date, so there's no software that's installed or owned or maintained in any of these situations, and the hardware is really just things that are in the field. Like I said, manual control and override from a secure web gateway, data service, the available to download data, have all the data available for analysis, and then lastly, public API access, which allows for integration of that data into either web pages or web applications. Basically, your stormwater will be accessible when you want to engage, but most often it's thinking on its own automatically to help address the most complex challenges you have about timing of flows, particularly in combined sewers. Through this partnership, this scale pricing is available to communities that have at least 3 sites that they're interested in retrofitting. So in addition to the services, so the $200 a month just addresses the kind of ongoing services that are provided minute by minute. There are 3 other things, hardware components that are needed for deployment of Opti, and we're providing those as part of this partnership and approach at a fixed price. So specifically, you'll get all of the hardware and the associated commissioning services for $10,000 per site. So if you have one of the assets we talked about and you add Opti, it requires an investment in hardware of $10,000 for the facility, plus paying $200 per month. So that on the hardware side, really what all that's needed is a level sensor, and it's included in that $10,000. Control valve up to 6 inches. We're not going to buy a 72-inch valve for you for $10,000, obviously. So, but a 6-inch control valve will address, particularly in site connection tanks, a very large facility. And then all necessary communications equipment and the associated enclosures. So it's really everything you need in order to physically deploy and then deploy the intelligent services as well to operate those facilities with Opti. And then I mentioned commissioning. The $10,000 per facility also includes on-site commissioning, which is basically final installation verification services, and then configuration of the system to operate consistent with your goals. The Opti services, the ongoing $200 a month, also includes customer support and engineering. So this isn't like, here's a piece of software and you are running it on your own. Opti is engaged day to day, providing the service, but also there to support directly the customer as part of those services with expert engineering support and customer service. Lastly, and maybe most importantly to many of you, hopefully, is that Opti is guaranteeing that you will see a dramatic decrease in wet weather flow. So let's look at that part a little bit more closely on the next slide. Yeah, so we've seen in these installations around the country that they function very well, and some of these direct examples from the presentation today show that. We also realize that this is a new technology, and in adopting new technologies with our partners, you're taking some level of risk. This is always the case in doing something new and innovative. Certainly something as exciting as Opti. comes along with some level of risk. We know, though, that risk is actually quite low, and we think it's important, however, to directly address that perceived risk by guaranteeing the outcome. We're offering, as part of this partnership, to assume all of the performance risk. If we are not able to reduce your wet weather flows from the facilities that are retrofit by at least 50% over the existing passive infrastructure, you will not pay for Opti's CMAC services at all. So we're doing this. We don't offer this to everybody. It's an exclusive offer as part of this partnership, and we're glad that you guys could join today and hear about what we're up to, and we're looking forward to engaging with you. We should be able to get through a good number of questions, and the first one I think is helpful and is an important point of clarification. In combined sewers, where does the drawdown discharge go to? How does that happen also in a separate storm sewer system? So that came from Jim Feeler. And it's really important. In the overall solution, we're able to discharge to wherever is appropriate. In combined sewers, the critical thing is timing. So in most cases, we discharge, particularly for an existing facility, to where the water already flowed to. So in a site connection or detention system, we're really just controlling the outlet between that detention system and the combined sewer. But we have complete control of the hydrograph. So it's using and modulating the flows to the sewer based on the goals, reducing flooding or minimizing wet weather discharge. In the extreme example, we don't discharge anything during wet weather when you have events that are smaller than the tank volume, and then we modulate it otherwise to the combined sewer. So it's all about timing in combined sewers. In many cases, though, too, as Robert Gu described, there are other places you can discharge water in the urban environment. If there are opportunities to, for example, irrigate green infrastructure or infiltrate, we have some large systems where the overflow and discharge go into large infiltration facilities. That can be done as well. So you can control the hydrograph to green infrastructure or an infiltration facility or to the combined sewer for combined systems. In separate storm sewers, it's also the case that the water is typically discharged to wherever it was discharging before in a retrofit situation. So if you had a dry pond that you were converting to a wet pond, we didn't spend this presentation talking about separate sewers very much, but we would be controlling the hydrograph and, as a result, the water quality, because we could increase residence time to the discharges. But they typically go to the MS4 or to a receiving water, or in the case where there is green infrastructure, and we have a number of places, it might even discharge to a place like bioretention cells or infiltration galleries. One of the most effective things we've done, for example, on flood control is in Minnesota for just outside Minneapolis, we have a large facility, an existing pond that was designed to overflow into an infiltration facility, and Opti automatically makes decisions in real time about drawing that system down to increase the flood storage capacity in the same way that Albany was doing. So that was the first question. There was a question, I think I addressed it partially in the discussion, but I wanted to bring it up again. It was from Jim Pittman about the automatic drawdown of lakes or other storage in cities. And the primary, he wanted to know, does this require a person to be involved to make the decisions? And the answer is that Opti makes these decisions in real time around, makes the decisions in real time around what's going to happen with the weather. For example, the facility in Albany will automatically watch what's going to happen with the weather, and based on the programmed active storage component, so it doesn't have to be the entire volume, but the facility draws itself down to create additional flood storage. The same thing is the case in other places around the country where there are existing impoundments. So these could be water features in parks in particular, a good opportunity, like at Brooklyn Botanical Gardens in New York City. The water features will drain themselves down using Opti to increase flood storage capacity. So the really important thing with Opti is it's not an additional burden, something that you would need to watch, like another app on your phone or another dashboard to pay attention to. If you haven't heard from Opti, you can assume that it is functioning in the way that you have intended and making decisions on your behalf. So the intent is to really improve the performance of facilities and entire watersheds without adding to the complexity and actually simplifying the management of those sets of infrastructure. So the next question is whether or not there is the need for a calibrated hydraulic model in order for the system to work. And I think it's a great question and one that comes up. There is a simplistic hydrologic model in Opti, obviously that we need to convert from rainfall to runoff in order to determine the volumes for drawdown or to determine what's going to happen with the facility filling up over the next 24, 48, 72 hours. But interestingly, a calibrated hydraulic model, because we're doing upstream storage, is not absolutely critical. It can be helpful in some cases, particularly if it's calibrated, to be able to determine how to set up initially Opti for deployment. One of the things that's really interesting that changes the way that we interact with these systems, though, is because every rainstorm and the response of the storage to that rainstorm is monitored and stored, we actually can, as part of the initial deployment and periodic redeployment year to year or month to month, we're able to look at the data and improve the algorithm to improve the performance of the system. So in fact, you can deploy Opti on an existing asset without knowing much at all about the function of that asset. The initial deployment, you would choose to not operate it if you had no information, but you would monitor that facility, and Opti automatically does that because you're monitoring the storage and its response to rainfall. And then you would have information in order to establish direct rainfall runoff information in real time in order to empirically establish the optimal algorithm for improving the performance of that facility. So one of the really exciting things is you without much modeling or even knowledge of the system, you can deploy, observe, then calibrate, and then operate, which is very different than kind of the traditional civil engineering implementation. There's a question that came in about security. I mentioned that the data services are encrypted and secure. I won't get into all of the detail, but security and encryption of data is one of the absolute most important components of what we do. And a place that we really have differentiated ourselves relative to past real-time control systems. And we can provide probably more detail than you'd like about how we are able to securely control and monitor these systems, and that you can trust these systems in the same way that you trust your bank or other critical services. And we use the exact same infrastructure and protocols and standards that are used by the top levels of even the Department of Defense or the criminal justice system in protecting the security of information. And we can give more detail on that. So there was a question about how do we determine the performance guarantee. So we said that we would not have any of our clients as part of this partnership pay for the services if we're not able to reduce the wet weather flow by greater than 50%. And I can see why there would be a question about that. I think it's important to know what exactly we're saying. Because we're observing the systems that are installed, we have real data from these systems. So the way that we go about doing this is that during the initial deployment, likely if it's during a rainy period, depends on where you are in the country, whether that's seasonal or not. If it's not seasonal, it could be the first 1 to 2 or 3 months. We can observe the baseline conditions. So we can deploy Opti in a manual mode, so it's not making automated decisions, and observe the passive behavior of the existing infrastructure in real time during a number of baseline events. So we're empirically able to observe what the hydraulics and hydrology of those systems, likely obtaining more information than you've ever had about those, the function of those systems prior to the installation. And then after that baseline period, we would turn on the automated operation of the system with forecast integration, and then operate the system with Opti controlling the facility. And again, we're collecting data minute by minute about those systems, and we are then able to make sure that we've collected enough information to categorize and characterize adequately the performance of Opti with the as it is implemented in running automatically, and then comparing those two outcomes. So depending on the system and the complexity, it may require a fairly straightforward model that uses the empirical data we've just collected for calibration, so we could determine long-term performance. But our expectation is that we would be able to demonstrate with that empirical data, as well as use that data to calibrate a definitive estimate of the long-term performance of that system in a way that everyone would sit around the table and clearly agree that the performance is well over 50%. And like I said, the reason we feel so confident about that is that we know empirically on the systems that we have retrofit, particularly where the existing infrastructure is focused on peak control, that it's frequently the case that we're well over 90%. So there's actually a lot of conservatism, even though 50% sounds really aggressive. We know that the actual result is likely to be much higher than that. We're actually going to finish a few minutes early, which is maybe rare for me in giving talks. But I really appreciate everybody joining. And we have back on the screen the email address. Even if you didn't fill out the survey, we would encourage you to reach out to us if you have questions about any of what you've seen. We have a website up specifically for this partnership, OptiRTC-CSO.com. We also have our regular website, which is OptiRTC.com. And we're going to post the questions and an FAQ page at the address you see on the screen right now that will address if there are any other questions that come in, what people are asking about as part of the process. So we are hoping also to post this. We have recorded it, and we can make that available as well. So we really appreciate all of your time, and we've had fantastic participation. Really a great number of people showed up for this webinar, and we appreciate the speakers attending and giving the case studies. I think more than anything else, it's great just to hear from people who are actually seeing these benefits in real time in their communities. So thank you again, and we look forward to talking with you about the great things we can accomplish together. Have a good afternoon.